Hello and welcome everyone. I welcome you to the Bahrain Initiative for Development, a fairly new think tank rooted in the fundamentals for working for Afghans and by Afghans. This is a conversation on diplomacy, geopolitics, and development concerning a volatile region we all are very keenly monitoring right now. Um, in a rather gloomy and challenging year, Pakistan is having its long awaited moment in the sun. Pakistan actually has credible reasons to celebrate because it is not the first time that Pakistan has involved itself in a high wire diplomacy. We know, the country's military leaders have long had a wish to play on the global chessboard. Uh, at the time we speak, Pakistan has proved itself that there's more to its name than the domestic turmoil related to the government. Uh, we are going to be talking about how it has emerged as a pivotal actor at an intersection of two interlocking geopolitical fault lines. What it is doing to mediate and solve between the US and Iran. But at the same time, its own regional issues, looking to end the war while being engaged in one. So, it reminds me of the time in 1972 when Pakistan spent 3 years running a back channel communication for the US and China ahead of the President Nixon's visit. Uh, but these delicate and high stakes work has only resulted in much needed domestic ego boost or bolstered the region. So now, today that we are, sitting together with uh, important voices, uh, we want to talk about how it's a two-edged sword and has proved that Pakistan is actually the most powerful leader and the voice for a generation that has to offer. Sorry, just one second. Yeah. Uh, at the same time, Pakistan has diplomatic activism in the 2026 US-Iran war and its hardening stance towards the Taliban regime. How it's no longer abstract foreign policy matter, and they define the operational reality for development actors working across borders. So we are here to discuss the US and Iran war, and Pakistan's role in it, and how it is going to solve its own issues with Afghanistan in its backyard. For that, I have just one second. Yeah. For that, I'm ready to open the floor to some of the most knowledgeable voices on the region at a time. I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. We have former special Pakistan's former special representative on Afghanistan, Ambassador Asif Durrani. We have Tanya, who's a scholar and senior journalist. We have Ambassador Ashraf Hedri, who is the president of Displaced International and distinguished fellow at the Arizona State University. And we have Dr. Aryan Sharifi, who is a researcher on political and security affairs. So can we start with you, Tanya, on this, with your keynote address on the topic, please?
Sure. Thank you. Well, let me begin by thanking the Bahrain Initiative for Development for convening this timely discussion and for bringing together such a distinguished group of speakers whose insights I very much look forward to hearing and engaging with. As you pointed out, at a moment when one of the most dangerous confrontations in recent history unfolded between the United States, Israel, and Iran, the world expected the usual suspects to step in. European countries, regional powers like Egypt, perhaps even Turkey. Instead, the country that emerged at the center of diplomacy was Pakistan. That in itself tells us something about how global politics is changing. Pakistan's role as a mediator in the US-Iran crisis is not just surprising, it is in many ways improbable. A country long viewed as peripheral to Middle Eastern diplomacy suddenly became the channel through which two adversaries with no formal relation since 1979 began talking again. And yet this did not happen overnight, nor was this Pakistan's first move. Before hosting direct talks, you'll remember that Islamabad had already begun positioning itself as a diplomatic convener. In late March, as tensions were escalating, Pakistan brought together regional heavyweights, including Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey to explore ways to de-escalate and prevent a wider war. By the time Washington and Tehran found themselves looking for a channel, Pakistan had already placed itself at the center of the conversation. The result of a convergence of geography, positioning, and the right timing. But first, let's look at geography. Pakistan shares, as we all know, a long and sensitive border with Iran. Instability in Iran does not stay contained. It spills into Pakistan's own internal security, energy supply, and sectarian balance. That gives Islamabad a stake in preventing escalation, or what many Pakistanis I've spoken to keep saying, we have skin in the game. Second, positioning. Pakistan has spent years maintaining a careful balance between Washington and Tehran. It has kept working relationships with both, even when those ties pulled in opposite directions. That balancing act was seen as a liability, a sign of ambiguity. But at this juncture, it has become Pakistan's greatest diplomatic asset. Third, timing. When the crisis escalated and traditional diplomatic channels stalled, Pakistan stepped into the vacuum. It offered not just mediation, but a venue, a back channel, and a degree of trust that few others could provide. And here, what is especially striking is who led the effort. Not civilian diplomats, but the Pakistani military. Now, for decades, we can all agree that Pakistan's military has been the country's most powerful institution, not only in security policy, but also foreign relations. But for the first time, it stepped fully into the diplomatic role. Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir has become the man of the hour, a key figure in brokering a ceasefire and facilitating talks in Islamabad. For the media, he's the man who launched 1,000 headlines. Who is Asim Munir? But all this also casts a spotlight on how diplomacy works today. Militaries are no longer just instruments of war. They're increasingly instruments of diplomacy. They maintain direct lines with counterparts. They control intelligence, and they can offer assurances that civilian channels sometimes cannot, because they have the ability to ensure agreements are enforced. So in Pakistan's case, the military suddenly became the diplomatic corps. And this approach seems to be working, at least in the short term. Without a doubt, talks remain fragile and the outcome is uncertain, but the fact that they happened at all is significant. The more important question, though, is not how Pakistan did this, but why it was able to pull it off. And the answer partly lies in the absence of alternatives. China, too closely aligned with Iran to serve as a neutral intermediary, Russia, preoccupied with Ukraine, and Gulf states are directly implicated in the conflict. Turkey has regional reach, but not the same level of access in Washington. Pakistan, by contrast, occupies a rare middle ground. It has ties to Iran, working relations with the US, and enough distance from the core confrontation to be acceptable to both sides. But Pakistan is not mediating out of altruism. It has real stakes in the outcome, as I said, skin in the game. Disruption in the Strait of Hormuz directly affects its energy supplies. Regional instability can spill across its borders. Escalation carries immediate risks for Pakistan's own internal cohesion. Mediation, in this sense, is self-preservation. And that, paradoxically, is what makes it effective. But let's look at the longer trajectory here. For much of its recent history, Pakistan has been viewed through a narrow lens in global politics, often defined by security concerns or internal instability. This is, after all, a country that 2 decades ago was synonymous with harboring Osama bin Laden and facing persistent accusations of tolerating militant groups. What we're witnessing today is the culmination of a roughly 20-year metamorphosis from a state seen as part of the problem to one positioning itself as part of the solution. From a country under suspicion to one holding, at least momentarily, a key to peace in one of the most dangerous geopolitical flashpoints of our time. It's a remarkable case study in strategic rebranding, and we'll be studying this for years to come. Of course, that does not mean that the transformation is complete or uncontested. Pakistan still faces internal challenges, and its foreign policy is affected by competing pressures. And this is where today's discussion becomes especially important. We're not only here to examine Pakistan's role in the Iran crisis, but to ask what this transformation means for its immediate neighborhood, particularly Afghanistan. While global headlines have been dominated by the Iran conflict, ongoing tensions between Pakistan and the Taliban have been largely eclipsed. Yet they remain active, unresolved, and consequential. Pakistan's evolving global standing and its new diplomatic posture will inevitably shape how those tensions are managed and potentially how they're resolved. Pakistan's newfound global stature, its positioning, gives it something it has not always had in abundance, and that's leverage. Not just over the immediate diplomatic process, but in its wider regional dealings, including with actors like the Taliban. It may draw tacit backing from regional international powers who may not fully align with Pakistan, but increasingly see it as useful, even necessary, in preventing escalation. That kind of support would further strengthen Islamabad's hand. Although with this new visibility comes greater scrutiny. The more Pakistan presents itself as a broker of peace abroad, the more its own internal security landscape comes under the microscope. Its credibility as a mediator will increasingly depend on whether it can demonstrate stability at home and address longstanding concerns about militancy within its own borders. But coming back to the main point, what this moment has shown is that influence in today's world is not only about economic weight or military power, it's also about access, credibility, and the ability to bring adversaries to the table when others cannot. Whether the US-Iran talks ultimately succeed remains an open question. The gaps between the two sides are still wide, and the risk of renewed escalation remains real. But Pakistan has already achieved something significant, inserting itself into one of the most consequential diplomatic arenas of our time, not as a bystander, but as a broker. The challenge now is sustaining that role without overreach and ensuring that its credibility is reinforced rather than undermined. And it may be a sign of what diplomacy will increasingly look like in a more multipolar world, where the most effective mediators are not always the most obvious ones. Thank you.
That was a very sharp and incisive summary of what's going on, and I'm so glad we started with you, because only to match the the insightful points here, I really want to speak to Ambassador Durrani here. He's someone I've been continuously been in touch with on the topic, on the mediation efforts, on what Pakistan can do more. But one thing that I've understood from him is that he is not celebrating, he is not lauding how everyone else outside of Pakistan has been cheering Pakistan on. He has maintained that Pakistan is fulfilling its duty. It's a geopolitical responsibility that Pakistan has had. But to understand more of that, I think, Ambassador Durrani, I would love to hear more from you in your keynote address here.
Thank you, Arpan. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I thank the Bahrain Initiative for bringing us together for this timely discussion. We are looking at two overlapping crises: the ongoing US-Iran conflict and the evolving situation in Afghanistan. My central argument is simple. These are no longer separate theaters. They are strategically intertwined, and Pakistan today sits at the intersection of both. Let me begin with the US-Iran war. Pursuing what I would describe as a high reward balancing strategy. It is engaging Washington on security and economic fronts while maintaining functional neighborly ties with Tehran. This is not neutrality in the classical sense. It is calibrated multi-alignment. On the mechanics of diplomacy, Pakistan has relied on active shuttle engagement, such as hosting discussions in Islamabad, sending high-level delegations to Tehran and Washington, and coordinating quietly with the Gulf intermediaries. Ladies and gentlemen, the immediate objective is the de-escalation, extending ceasefires and preventing further escalation. But beyond that, there is a broader ambition to create space for structured negotiations on nuclear issues, the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, sanctions relief, and regional stability. If successful, this diplomacy could reopen critical energy and trade corridors, which are vital not just for Pakistan, but for the wider region. However, this approach carries real risks, as escalation in the conflict could trigger energy shocks, further straining Pakistan's economy. And perhaps most importantly, Pakistan must carefully navigate its exposure to sanctions while maintaining credibility with both Washington and Tehran. At the same time, there are opportunities. If managed effectively, Pakistan could reposition itself as a regional connectivity hub, linking Central Asia, Afghanistan, and global markets through its ports. So the question is, can Pakistan convert crisis diplomacy into sustainable economic outcomes? That will ultimately determine whether this mediation is strategic or merely tactical. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now turn to Afghanistan, where Pakistan's policy appears to be undergoing a significant shift. For the past few years, Pakistan's approach towards Taliban was based on engagement and expectation that cooperation would address shared security concerns. That expectation has not materialized. The presence and operations of the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan from Afghan territory have fundamentally altered Pakistan's threat perception. What we are seeing now is a transition from strategic patience to strategic pressure. This shift is visible in several ways, such as increased cross-border security actions, tighter border controls and trade restrictions, and importantly, a change in political signaling. There is now a growing indication that Pakistan's tolerance for current status quo is diminishing. While regime change is not formally declared policy, there is clear message. Legitimacy must be tied to behavior, particularly on counterterrorism. This raises important questions. If Pakistan moves towards a more coercive posture, what are the implications for Afghanistan's internal stability? And conversely, if Afghanistan remains unstable, what does that mean for Pakistan's security and economic outlook? The answer lies in what I would call the security development nexus. Instability in Afghanistan directly translates into disrupted trade, refugee pressures, and increased militancy along the border. At the same time, a stable Afghanistan represents a major economic opportunity for transit trade, regional connectivity, and development along the Western corridor. So Pakistan faces a dual challenge: how to apply pressure without triggering collapse, and how to support stability without legitimizing adverse behavior. Ladies and gentlemen, let me connect these two theaters, the Iran conflict and Afghanistan we are faced with. A prolonged US-Iran confrontation risks diverting international attention away from Afghanistan. It also creates space for non-state actors to exploit cross-border instability. In Pakistan, this means managing simultaneous pressures on two fronts. Western border insecurity linked to Afghanistan, regional volatility linked to Iran. This is why Pakistan's mediation role is so critical. Its credibility in one theater affects its leverage in the other. Let me conclude with a few forward-looking observations. First, Pakistan needs to institutionalize its diplomacy. Ad hoc mediation can only go so far. There is a need for structured, possibly multilateral frameworks that anchor its role more sustainably. Second, economic connectivity must be de-linked from political volatility. Trade routes, energy corridors, and development initiatives should not be perpetually hostage to security fluctuations. Third, on Afghanistan, Pakistan needs a coherent, balanced strategy, one that combines pressure with incentives and security objectives with development engagement. Finally, for development actors, the key is to focus on resilience and adaptability, such as supporting border communities, designing programs that can function on political uncertainty, and investing in connectivity that benefits the broader region. Let me end on this note. First, Pakistan today is navigating a very narrow strategic space. In the Iran conflict, it seeks to be a mediator. In Afghanistan, it is a stakeholder under pressure. And second, its success will depend on whether it can align diplomacy, security, and development into a single coherent framework rather than managing them as separate, competing priorities. Thank you. I look forward to
Thank you, Ambassador. I believe everyone here has questions on everything that you've said here so far, but I would like Ambassador Ashraf Heidari to now, give us his points, and particularly on the fact that Pakistan and Afghanistan's relationship, how it has, completely gone haywire in the last 12 months. The last time we spoke, we were on a completely different tangent between the two nations, but now Pakistan has declared it's in an open war with Afghanistan with no signs of it taking back those words. So if Ambassador Heidari, you could address those, please.
Well, thank you so much for this very timely gathering panel discussion. Unfortunately, there are not many of these. Very rarely, as the situation involving US-Iran has dominated headlines, and Pakistan has also found an opportunity to advance mediation and conflict resolution, benefiting not only Pakistan, but also regional stability and global peace. And we see from this situation how intertwined regional, global security, economic issues are that are hurting and harming everyone more or less. Even here in the United States, unfortunately, inflation is rising, and it has hit the wallet of taxpayers in a way that we haven't seen recently. The cost, direct cost of this war so far has been estimated to be $25 billion, and then indirectly between $650 billion to $1 trillion to only the United States. Now, calculate the cost to the rest of the global economies, especially those of the bottom billion being countries like Afghanistan, war ravaged, and so much at the mercy of regional stakeholders such as Pakistan and Iran, and as well as extra regional players whose unfortunately misaligned interests and incentives have turned countries like Afghanistan into protracted conflicts of geopolitics. In case of Afghanistan now, we have had conflict for over 4 decades involving primarily, of course, extra-regional players. We know from the 1990s, 1980s, of course, 2000s, principally Pakistan at the heart of this. First, of course, 80s, facilitating US-led Western war against adversary communist Marxist Soviets and their Soviet-backed regime. And then, of course, the aftermath of the withdrawal in the 1990s, where Pakistan principally supported the warring Mujahideen factions as it is former proxies, and later created the Taliban in 1994, and then ultimately brought the Taliban into power, as we know, in 2021, when ISI chief went to Kabul and installed their proxy in search of achieving strategic depth in Afghanistan, which it declared a victory for Pakistan, including its prime minister, who had been working, Imran Khan, with Ambassador Khalilzad, appointed by the Trump administration first time, and then the Biden administration, who retained him to transfer, unfortunately, this growing young democracy to an extremist terrorist network sponsored by Pakistan's rogue military security and institutions, sadly now much to the detriment of Pakistan's own long-term peace and stability, which Ambassador Durrani alluded to, unfortunately, which has come back to haunt Pakistan. So with that, summary background, let me dive directly, not into, description of today's problems, not into, declaration of commitments to connectivity, which over the past 20 years we've heard. And we're not short of those commitments from the 2002 Declaration on Good Neighborly Relations with Afghanistan, underpinned by non-interference, one of the core commitments that we know, which was never enforced, to a bond agreements, to the RECA, regional cooperation. RECA, I've just forgotten what it stands for, but it was a mechanism for regional economic cooperation in Afghanistan, to the Heart of Asia process that was established in Istanbul, to the quadrilateral security coordination, QCG, involving Russia, involving China, Pakistan, the United States, and Afghanistan, to the rest. So not short of mechanisms, not short of declarations, not short of agreements that we have signed with Pakistan, with India, with China, with the United States and NATO allies and the rest. But what has unfortunately really not been there is an enforcement mechanism. Now, with NATO gone from Afghanistan, while still maintaining presence one way or the other and continuing to balance against adversaries and rivals in the region unfortunately has failed Afghanistan and has failed itself. Why? Because the problems under the Taliban today are still regionally rooted from the multiplicity of crises, from political to security to humanitarian to gender apartheid to drug production, and as well as migration. That's where we come from, Displaced International. These are, the spillover effects of the status quo maintained by the region. While the region has bilaterally dealt with Afghanistan, be it before 2021 with the Islamic Republic or post-2021, they have not really converged together, despite, of course, declarations of commitment and good neighborly relations with either before or after 2021. They've done nothing, together to help advance sustainable peace in Afghanistan through, of course, inclusion and legitimacy on the one hand, and as well as connectivity, which Ambassador also pointed out, that Afghanistan, with a legitimate, inclusive government that is going to stabilize, which is now the lack of a structural problem contributing to the sex or class crisis that I mentioned, is the problem. That this Afghanistan, at the heart of the region, connecting South Asia and Central Asia, would benefit all neighbors. And that's why I think, given the role that Pakistan is playing right now, positions it best to help Afghanistan through a sustainable process, one that involves the UN, what I call UN-led, SCO plus supported, where Pakistan initiates this conflict resolution process under the UN, puts it on the agenda of SCO, which includes Iran, Pakistan, and India, of course, China and Russia, key neighbors of Afghanistan, and then adopt a regional compact for Afghanistan's stabilization, where the countries that I mentioned no longer deal with the Taliban bilaterally, but deal collectively as one, because they more or less share interests related to the crisis that I mentioned. Now, Pakistan hosts somewhere between 2 to 4 million refugees just on migration. Iran, between 4 to 6 million refugees. And Pakistan, as we know, is now directly, unfortunately, taking these blows from TTP and BLA, which needs to be addressed not through these, on and off selective airstrikes, but through a process which Pakistan initiates and helps bring everyone together now that it's working regionally with GCC, with Iran, and then, of course, extra regional with the United States. When I say a plus, it means Pakistan is again best positioned to bring the region together on Afghanistan, but also persuades and encourages the United States to support this regionally led process for stabilization of Afghanistan, where Afghanistan gets an inclusive, legitimate government, including the Taliban, among other Afghan sides. That this pluralistic society is represented, including by women, in this government to be established by the region. And if necessary, the region could even further enforces, should the Taliban, not cooperate, field a multinational regional peace enforcement force. Because Afghanistan has always been a peace enforcement mission. We've talked about peacekeeping. We've talked about UNAMA, which remains one of the weakest political missions of the UN in Afghanistan compared to other political missions across the world. We don't have time to discuss those, but it is an opportunity for Pakistan to politically engage, regionally engage, and also through the UN, of course, since it's going to be led by the UN, given legitimacy and institutional memory, also under the UN, field a SCO, so to speak, led multinational force to enforce peace in Afghanistan through formation of an inclusive, legitimate government consistent with the United Nations Charter on the one hand, and as well as the objectives, the provisions of multiple declarations and agreements bilaterally signed, multilaterally signed at the regional level, and as well as internationally signed. And there, of course, we've signed with the United States under the Islamic Republic a strategic partnership agreement, some of whose provisions remain relevant, consistent with, of course, U.S. security concerns and Afghanistan, bilateral security agreement, and so on and so forth. So the frameworks are there. The agreements are there. The declarations are there. The challenges that I mentioned, foremost affecting the region, are there with global implications. Just remember, under the Taliban, you have ETIM, or the Uyghur terrorist network operating in Afghanistan. As much as, of course, they have removed them from areas of concern to China, but they're there. the Taliban have not eliminated them or dismantled or handed them over to China. So China's concerned, so is Russia, so is Iran foremost because of water, the disputes that is ongoing or potentially, there, especially since the province of Sistan could go dry and millions of Iranians could literally be forcibly displaced because of this environmental issue if the Taliban somehow turned that tap, especially the water from Helmand River on Iran. So that's why a regional compact then would bring all these connectivity issues into the design such that they're conditionally enforced and reciprocated and verified and co-monitored by the region, that for non-interference and non-use of Afghanistan for terrorism, and as well as formation of an inclusive government that is legitimate, that is supported by the region. In return for that, the region would benefit from what? Water, energy. Both Pakistan and Iran need Afghanistan's water. So does Central Asia. And that the region needs Afghanistan for connectivity, trade, and investment. We know that. That's why President Ghani did so much to advance this. In exact words which Ambassador Durrani just put it a while ago. But unless these are part of the design of the peace architecture in Afghanistan and self-enforcing by the member states to sign such a compact, unfortunately, we would see more of the same. The region talking about it, the region bilaterally engaging with the Taliban or any other entity, but not necessarily collectively enforcing it in a way that is win. A win for the Afghan people, a win for the region, and a win for global peace and security. And that's where I stop it, and I'll take questions later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bas. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that you go the length with every point. And, I think our discussion will be completely, it won't have the soul. It will be incomplete if we don't speak if we don't include the keen and sharp observation of Dr. Aryan Sharifi. He's our esteemed academic panelist who's actually been studying the regional development, the volatility of it, in and out. And it would be our pleasure, Dr. Sharifi, if you can explain how you've observed the US-Iran war play out, the conflict in Afghanistan fade away at the same time. The global attention shifted to US-Iran, but like Afghanistan was also dealing with its own challenges at the same time. And the open war with Pakistan and how it can end, basically.
Thank you, Arpan, and thank you to the Bahrain Initiative for organizing this webinar. I'm glad to be here along with such a distinguished panel. So I'm very much privileged. I think what I'm going to talk about basically has elements of what everybody else, Tanya, Ambassador Durrani, and Ambassador Haidari have already touched upon. But then I'm going to shift slightly, as you suggested, towards Afghanistan-Pakistan issue. Now, to start with, I think we all agreed that Pakistan is really emerging as an active power in the region. And I think that role for Pakistan is going to be even more elevated in light of the emerging, potentially multipolar world order and how that would enhance the roles of middle powers such as Pakistan, not only in regional affairs, but also beyond up to the global affairs. So that is something I'm thinking, and that is something I got, I think, almost from every other speaker today in this webinar. Now, with regard to Afghanistan, the same thing. If Pakistan already is a middle power, is a regional actor, going to only be elevated, and that position at that level. I think it is critical that Pakistan takes really active steps to resolve this issue with Afghanistan and to have mutually respected and respectful relations with its neighbor Afghanistan. Now, at present, I see the way things are between the two countries and the wider region. I see Pakistan facing both challenges and really severe challenges, but also unprecedented opportunities with regard to Afghanistan, at least in three levels. At the Pakistani state level, challenges and opportunities. At the Afghan state levels, challenges and opportunities. And third, at the Afghan opposition's level, both challenges and opportunities. Now, at the Pakistani state level, I think it is high time that the overall lens, the strategic lens that Islamabad has looked at Afghanistan for decades, I think it is time that that lens really changes. That paradigm, if you will, has shifted in light of the changes, the emerging changes in the world, the emerging changes in the region, Pakistan's role, more active role in the regional and world affairs, but also, most importantly, in light of the fact that this particular strategic outlook towards Afghanistan for at least 5 to 6 decades hasn't really brought up good results for either of the country. I think it is time to change. And what do I mean by that change? The way to look at Afghanistan as either a client state or a state that has to continue to be under instability. That is the lens I am saying that needs to really change, especially when it comes to the Pakistani military establishment, if you will. For decades, they have used, as Ambassador Haidari also mentioned, and in fact, it's been also, stated by, most recently by Pakistani statement, including the defense minister himself. For decades, Islamabad has utilized proxy groups, mostly Afghans, to destabilize Afghanistan. Going back to the king's time, to King Zahir Shah time, to the first Afghan republic under Daud Khan time, coming back to the 14 years of the communist rule in the country, and then coming to the 20 years of the republic. That lens has been steady, has been consistent, but it continues to bear negative results, really, for Pakistan and, of course, for Afghanistan. The latest example is the current rulers of Afghanistan who were in Pakistan for 20 years, who were enabled there, who were, and then they came to power, and we see the situation right now. So I believe that it is time that that strategic lens shifts. It changes into a lens would that would promote coexistence, that would promote peaceful neighborly relations with Afghanistan. And I think if that shift would come from Islamabad, the same shift would come from Kabul's side as well. I mean, we also have to agree that Afghans have also not been looking to Pakistan through a very nice and neighborly lens, going back to 1948 with the only negative vote at the United Nations against Pakistan's admission into the United Nations system. Consistently, Afghan regimes have also looked negatively toward Pakistan and have tried to, do whatever they could to show that animosity, if you will. But I think it is time that both countries shift, but that shift really would have to start from Pakistan because Pakistan holds the upper hand and Pakistan is the stronger power, it's the larger power, and it's the emerging, really regional actor. But it also has challenges. I mean, it is not easy to bring in strategic changes into a lens, into an outlook that has been there for decades. I'm pretty sure there are multiple stakeholders within the Pakistani state, particularly in the military, who probably would oppose that shift. But at the same time, given that it has not really borne positive results, the opportunity is there to change. Second, at the Afghan state level, currently, I think it goes without saying that Pakistan is facing an insurmountable challenges and problems with regard to the current rulers of Afghanistan. everything from a lack of domestic legitimacy for the current Afghan state, to a lack of international recognition there, to issues of the TTP and BLA, to issues of a lack of reliable partners, and then all of that. There's grave challenges. But at the same time, there's at least one opportunity that really did not exist over the past 50 years, and that is that the current rulers, despite all of the problems they have, they are in full territorial control of the country. Now, that territorial control doesn't have legitimacy, and that does not have diplomatic recognition. Those, however, the fact that they are in control across the country brings them into a situation where Pakistan can really do that paradigm shift and start digging into the ground, the roots of the problems between the two countries. And unless I think any regime in Kabul, unless they have full territorial control, they are really unable to start talking about the root causes of the problems between Afghanistan and Pakistan. So both challenges and an opportunity there. And then third, at the Afghan opposition level, again, there are grave challenges, but then there are opportunities as well for Pakistan to really utilize. The challenge is, of course, the main challenge is that Afghan opposition groups and figures and individuals are not united. They're in fact very much disunited. At least when it comes to the opposition, three prevailing views with regard to the future of Afghanistan persist within the Afghan oppositions. The first view is what is normally called change in the regime. What does that mean? That means that there is a plethora of Afghan groups and individuals who believe that if the Taliban government could bring in changes to certain policies, not the structure, just the policies, i.e., open up girls' schools, open up universities for women, let women to go to work, etc. A few key policies would change, then it's okay. Then they are acceptable, then they can go on. This is one view, and there's quite substantial number of people inside and outside Afghanistan who actually follow this line of thinking. The second view is what I call change within the regime. And that is a view that I believe, in my view, the majority of the Afghan opposition are of that view. And what that mean? That means that only change in policies is not acceptable, and it's not also even possible for the current state, unless there are structural changes, to bring in policy changes in within Afghanistan. So policy change is neither possible nor sufficient. There has to be structural changes. So the regime would have to change. As Ambassador Haidari mentioned, there would be a more inclusive regime there in which the Taliban will also be part of it, not the whole of it. As I always say, the Taliban are part of the Afghan reality. They're not the entire reality. They're just part of it. The Taliban would be part of it, but also all other Afghans would be part of it. A regime that would be based on the regime that will have domestic legitimacy, and that would lead to international recognition. A regime that would be Afghan, that would be Islamic, but also it would not be opposed to the realities of the 21st century. It would not be a regime that would harbor terrorist groups. It wouldn't be a regime that would promote Islamic fundamentalism. This is the second view among a lot of Afghans, and in my belief, in the survey I have done in my little research, this is the most prevailing one. So change within the regime. And then finally, third, you have regime change. There are certain opposition Afghan groups who actually reject the Taliban. They say, under no circumstances, we're going to sit with these people. Coexistence with the Taliban and their way of thinking is an impossibility. So the Taliban will have to completely go, and a new regime will have to be replaced. There are these three prevailing political views about the future of Afghanistan among the Afghan opposition. Now, the challenge for Pakistan, who at least hopefully would try to facilitate meaningful change in Afghanistan so that the relations between the two countries would come to normalcy. It is a challenge because the oppositions are not united, but at the same time, it is an opportunity for a country like Pakistan, as again, I'm echoing Ambassador Haidari here. It's not just Pakistan, but Pakistan could play a role. that would encourage regional and then global consensus building on Afghanistan that would then bring in these views together and eventually would hopefully produce a more united Afghan political opposition that could then be brought into talks with the Taliban that would materialize into a more inclusive government. So to wrap up, Pakistan is a central actor there. Pakistan is only emerging even more of a central and a powerful actor in the region in light of the emerging world order and in light of the changes, strategic changes in the region. And as such, Pakistan could play a central role in how Afghanistan would transition from its current state into a more durable state. But then again, both challenges and sets of opportunities at those three levels that Pakistan would need to face. Thank you. I'll stop here.
That was quite detailed, and I'm really glad because I could see Ambassador Durrani taking down some notes, Ambassador Heydari looking at the points that you made when you were citing him. But I think now is the time to kind of launch into the questions here. Also because we know that Ambassador Durrani has been, keenly monitoring the developments in the region. As someone who's right now also, in Pakistan, Ambassador Durrani, I would like to know that can we expect that Pakistan is ready to take on to the pressure that is being put from Afghanistan and the other countries in the region. Basically, like everyone has here mentioned, do we believe Pakistan actually has an upper hand and can bring an end to the conflicts? Because now everyone is looking to Islamabad, so it's quite a moment to be in spotlight.
Thank you, Arpan. I think do Pakistan have a choice? That's the issue. I mean, Iran-US war started not at Pakistan's behest. So we had to react because we are a direct party in a sense that we have been affected badly. Not only that we have a joint border with Iran, the oil prices have shot up unprecedentedly in Pakistan. Never in the living memory that I have, there's such a sharp increase in oil prices have taken place. Almost, you can say, 30% at a stroke of a pen. And we are still not sure that where those prices are going to end. And this is not just with Pakistan. In almost whole of Asia is dependent on the oil which passes through the Strait of Hormuz. And so this is a challenge. And with regard to other challenges, say Afghanistan, which I tried to briefly state it, our main concern is that instability in Afghanistan is not in Pakistan's favor. And then I fully agree with Dr. Sharifi's observation. But I'll give more weightage to Afghanistan's unity within its own ranks. That can only bring about a tangible change. And I hope some work is done on that count, that how the different Afghan groups come together and evolve a modus vivendi whereby they can rule the country peacefully. The problem here is that, for instance, now a bitter experience one could see was in '93 when all Mujahideen groups, they went to Makkah and they swore there to be united and to remain united. But as soon as they came out of Makkah, the civil war started. So that is the situation. And let me clarify here that Pakistan didn't establish the Taliban. It were the splinter groups of different parties, including Hizb Islami, Harkat-e-Islami, and others. Had this been the case, and then they are Afghans. I think our Afghan friends, whether Dr. Sharifi or Dr. Heydari, they know their history much better than me, although I'm of that same stock. And I've been dealing Afghanistan since 1979. Perhaps they were not born, or they may have been to the kindergarten. But the issue is there is the basic casualty in Afghanistan's political stability has been its disunity. If that comes, no power on earth can interfere in Afghanistan's affairs. For instance, you have seen the war with Iran. Americans tried to go for the regime change. They have failed. They have failed for the past 47 years. Nuclear is just a pretext. For instance, had this been the case, Israel, which is an undeclared nuclear weapon state, no one talks about that. You can't dare in the West to speak about Israel's nuclear program. You can't dare to speak about Israel's nuclear program in the United States. But here it is Iran, which has declared that it's not going for nuclear because it's haram under Islamic Sharia. So that is, and it's not being believed. And it's not being believed that when five superpowers, five veto-wielding powers and Germany, they signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And what happened? Here comes Trump. He scraps everything because at the behest of Israel. So here we are, when we are talking about politics, and we are talking, and more recently, why Iran should believe in the talks, negotiations, or its durability. When last 12-day war, it was Israel which initiated the war because a day earlier, there were vibes that America and Iran are nearing an agreement on nuclear. But the war started. And then this on 28th February, again, just a couple of days ago, we heard the good news that they are nearing a solution, and war started. So it's the credibility. Pakistan can only take the horse to water, but it can't make it drink, whether it is Iran or it's the United States. But we have to be a credible mediator, which we have done. Nothing has been leaked from Pakistan's side. It was either Iran or it was the United States, mostly from the United States, which they talked about the failure of the talks. So here in these circumstances, you ask about whether Pakistan is ready to take these challenges. This is what we have, and we have no other choice. And the reason was our credibility in the region was very much there, because for Iran, other regional countries were not acceptable. And similarly, for the United States, it could not propose a country to which Iran would have any trust. And still, while these dialogues are on, the question of trust is very much there. Iran's trust level about the United States is almost zero. So, but let's keep fingers crossed, and let's hope that good sense will prevail. Yeah.
Thank you, Ambassador. Tanya, I would like to bring you in here because we're looking at an unlikely moderator. We've not seen, mediator who's not, done anything like that in a while, and also faces its own challenges. But in this case, what is the, what is the good side of it? What is Pakistan? What is at stake for Pakistan here? And what is it going to lose if it doesn't work out? If it is not able to solve this war?
I think as I said, the mere fact that it brought the two sides together, two sides that haven't spoken, that have not had diplomatic relations for so many years, is in and of itself an achievement. And as Ambassador Durrani said, you can bring the horse to water, you can't make it drink. So I think one has to look at this as an achievement in and of itself. But I'd like to bring the conversation back to Afghanistan, because I think that fellow colleagues here made some very interesting points. I very much concur with Dr. Sharifi, who said that the opposition is not a monolith. So if you are hoping that Pakistan will use its newfound leverage and its newfound sort of gravitas on the regional and international stage, it's pretty difficult when the opposition is not united, that they have such, diverging views on how to proceed. And you're faced with a Taliban that still has a very triumphalist mentality. They believe they won on the battlefield and they won on the negotiating table, and they don't feel they need to compromise. They don't So it's a bit difficult on top of everything when you're not united. Then taking from Ambassador Haidari's very interesting proposal that the region has to deal with them as a united front, as a bloc, rather than on an individual basis, that is the ideal scenario. And yet so many of them have already gone the every man for himself road. From Uzbekistan to Turkmenistan to Kazakhstan, you name it, China, and even Pakistan and India to an extent, have all engaged in trade, some kind of engagement. It doesn't have to be a formal recognition like Russia, but they've engaged. So how do you bring out all these people on the same table and say, no, 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 moving forward, you don't deal with them until ABC? So we're dealing with a major challenge here where yeah, the opposition's got to kind of get its act together before Pakistan is seen as the entity that can push their file forward.
All right. Okay. In that case, would it be what would it boil down to as the top three key factors that could, stall the dialogue between Pakistan and Afghanistan? I believe Pakistan's demands on Afghanistan not providing any infrastructure or help to TTP is one of the biggest thorns in its sides, right? So how can Afghanistan or Taliban really, address Pakistan's concerns on this topic?
Are you asking me or?
Yes, done.
Unfortunately, in this case, dialogue is important. I remember back in 2001, before 9/11, I was in Rome and interviewed the former king. And even he was saying at the time, we have to talk to them. We have to talk to them. It's horrible. The situation is terrible, but we have to sit down and we have to do this through dialogue. So that I think is the key. They are there. They're not leaving. There's no appetite for any country to get in there and remove them by force. So they have to be engaged through dialogue.
Right. And Ambassador Hezi, in that case, what do we expect as the Taliban's, as the opposition actors in Afghanistan? How can they unite? Because I think we were talking about this few hours back, right? That is the need of hour, and people on both sides of the spectrum acknowledge that to bring about any meaningful change, it will have to be from within the country. So how can opposition get its act together? Because I think that's what we're collectively looking for as an answer here.
I think I wouldn't worry about that much because it's more of an excuse. Remember, the externality of the challenges confronting Afghanistan over the past four decades has been very clear, which I mentioned, which also true of US-Iran issues and the challenge facing Pakistan, how to make two actors talk where their incentives and interests are misaligned and where their structural and non-structural piece spoilers. And when I say piece spoilers, you can think about it. The very actors negotiating are also structural piece spoilers, spoiling the negotiation process. And I've just written an article which will come out soon, and it talks about these issues of, layered, what I call layered misalignment of interests and incentives, and the challenge confronting a mediator like Pakistan and the task for Pakistan. And this mediation process moving forward is to tell both sides that here your interests misaligned and here your interests that could potentially be aligned, provided that you commit the political will to align them so that this process moves forward and produces a win-win outcome, one outcome that is good for Iran and one good for US and Israel and one good for the GCC. That's the challenge facing Pakistan in this situation. And the same situation more or less involves Afghanistan, where the opposition parties that we talk about are hedging entities as much as regional and extra regional players have been hedging entities in the Afghan context. And many of these internal opposition, so-called resistance hedging entities are ultimately tied to these different players outside the region with competing and conflicting agendas. You have one more, tilting toward Iran. You have multiple tilting toward, Pakistan, and some of them have made visits to Pakistan, right? Because Pakistan has been selective in the way it has dealt with either the, Islamic Republic or post 2021 with the Taliban. And that's why I come back repeatedly that unless the region collectively acts and unless it departs from this selective hedging, bilateral, behavior, that Afghanistan would perpetually remain where it is, that the multiple crises that I mentioned, political, security, economic, migration or displacement, drugs, terrorism, will only continue worsening with implications for the region and as well as the world, which we saw in the 1990s, which culminated to the tragedy of 9/11. It was that situation, and now multiply it many times worse under the current Taliban regime. Just let's talk about gender apartheid. Which country in the region, whether it's democratic, whether it's authoritarian, has ever implemented in the recent modern human history a gender apartheid? Yes, you had a racial apartheid in South Africa, which ended, but no gender apartheid. More or less, women are participating in the polity, economy, and society. And coming back to Afghanistan, a dark extremist terrorist force manufactured outside a superimposed gender apartheid on 40 million Afghans who rejected religiously, let's put it Islamically, and culturally, and as well as also legally, both under Afghanistan's constitution and as well as international law. And the region knows that in Afghanistan, under a gender apartheid regime, where thousands and hundreds of Afghan youth, as we speak, and over 20,000 madrasas are today being radicalized, in 5 to 10 years will have serious implications for the countries which have traditionally sponsored the Taliban. These terrorists, unfortunately, and waiting, would be deployed to carry out attacks in Pakistan, as we have seen over the past 5 years, to Iran, to Central Asia, to places like Moscow, to places, in Europe and even the United States. And we've seen it in ways that some of these sleepers have been radicalized or others radicalized online and that they have carried out those attacks. So another 9/11 from Afghanistan should be expected, and a lot more than before 9/11 last time, given the status quo in Afghanistan. And that's why the status quo can be rationalized. We shouldn't wait for the Afghan sides. Who are the Afghan sides? They're not the 40 million Afghans. These are just, a few elite personalities rented by players before 2021. And now, where are they parked? They're parked in places like, Turkey and Pakistan and Iran and, larger diaspora. So they do not even represent 1% of Afghanistan, but they represent self-interest, unfortunately. And that self-interest is then achieved through ties with external players with their own agendas. So if Pakistan were really serious, then it would, if it was able to sponsor a terrorist extremist network for decades, it could also sponsor new faces of Afghanistan, Who are those new faces? You have a whole generation of Afghans beyond the figures of 80s and 90s, the traditional customers and clients of Pakistan. These are the ones like Mr. Sharifi, the likes of Mr. Sharifi in Pakistan, in Iran, etc., who believe in a compact, who believe in an inclusive, legitimate government, which includes the Taliban. And then, sponsoring this, putting it on the UN agenda, putting it on the SEO agenda, bringing everyone together, telling them that there's on and off pragmatic engagement while containing these crisis in Afghanistan is not going to help us. China, for example, cannot hope to really continue rising while its backyard is infested with the status quo. Or Russia, it would never be safe in sphere of influence, which is Central Asia, if Afghanistan was infested with the status quo. Or even India, as much as it made inroads, knows that the Taliban are not India's friends. They will never be. It was the Taliban who bombed, and then Akani network, embassy in Kabul, and hit their assets multiple times, and so on and so forth. And Pakistan is really, knows the Taliban like the back of its hands. It maintains influence, it maintains contacts, it maintains deep connections with the Taliban. And that's why, again, Pakistan is best positioned to help rationalize the status quo through a collective regional process that helps put an end to the status quo, enlisting those Taliban that are reconcilable, that believes in a safe region and a stable region and international laws and the UN Charter and the Afghan culture and Islam. Islam is all about tolerance. Islam is all about coexistence. Women in Islam has a very prominent place. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, worked for his wife. She was this equivalent of today's CEO, and the Prophet was a manager. But look what the Taliban are doing to Islam. Today, Islamophobia has grown exponentially because of the Taliban. And unfortunately, by extension, the role of Pakistan as a core member state of OIC, Organization of Islamic Countries, or cooperation that is concerned about Islamophobia, because what people see in Afghanistan, a gender apartheid legitimized by the Taliban under Islam, has increased Islamophobia. So the Taliban in Afghanistan is not just hurting Afghans, not the region, not the world, but Muslims as a whole. And we're talking about over 1 billion population, because each time you go to the airport, the security people, the immediate thing that comes to their mind is the behavior of the Taliban with Afghan women, which we daily watch on TV, or 9/11 or other instances. So to bring it back, let's not, shift any blame to these few fragmented, rented client individuals parked outside. Let's, sponsor a process, and let's bring institutions of the world, that's UN and the region and the shared interests within Afghanistan, that is at peace itself, with peace with the region, based on those three core principles: non-interference,
Right.
non-use of Afghanistan's territory for terrorism, and formation of an inclusive and legitimate government where the Taliban will be one party. Can Pakistan do it? Pakistan can do it. I congratulate Pakistan on the role it has played mediating between US and Iran, tapping its relations with GCC, with China, of course, with the United States, with Iran itself. Again, in case of Afghanistan, it's even in a better position to initiate the launching of a regional compact for Afghanistan's stabilization.
Yeah, but as Ambassador Durrani already pointed out, I think Afghanistan in its own, should be able to do this. And when we think like that, I'm looking at Kabul and Kandahar, who have cemented their grip on the country right now. I mean, for the fact that no country has given international recognition to the Taliban regime. is because they are here to stay, and everyone in the region also acknowledges that. So when we think about regime change, are we ignoring the fact that it is practically impossible to uproot this group from the country's, holds? Ambassador Hedri. Yeah.
There is no regime. This is just a terrorist, or let's put it in political science term, it's a armed non-state actor. Let's not recall. That's why they're not internally legitimate, and that's why they're not internationally recognized. There's a reason. And look at their behavior. They're not created to govern, and they've not been governing.
But
The
at the same time, these
So the economy's collapsed. So I'm not worried about these, small conversations about who's in power in Kabul and who's in power in Kandahar. What I'm talking about is the externality. My focus is on external players. If external players stop hedging, then they can bring these hedging Afghans together. Once these hedging Afghans are together, and once there's a conflict resolution process institutionalized through the UN and SCO, where everyone does their part under a compact, where there is conditionality, where there's reciprocity, where there's enforcement. Remember enforcement, then the Taliban would behave immediately because they will feel the pressure. So far, the Taliban thinks that it can just hedge, and they've learned how to hedge. Hedge against Pakistan, hedge against this, hedge against that. That's why they're dealing with Pakistan one way, they're dealing with Russia in another way. They're milking the United States for tens of millions of dollars yet on another way to maintain this artificial macroeconomic stability in Afghanistan, etc. So what I'm saying is that the external players are the problem that have maintained the Taliban and power towards their selective national security objectives, where those objectives are not aligned in the Afghan context. And that's why then you run into what powers balancing through instruments, often non-state actors like the Taliban. That's why you have the US supporting the Taliban, one way or another, at least engaging with them, China, Russia, Pakistan, and Iran. They're all maintaining pragmatic engagement with the Taliban in balancing acts. And who can do that? Non-state actors. So probably it's not in the interest of external players to have a legitimate and inclusive government consistent with the United Nations Charter. Maybe that's not helping advance their interest. That's why they're all reluctant and they're more interested in the status quo. So that's why I really take a deep dive into international relations and theories of international relations. Here we're talking about offensive realism and defensive realism, and how state actors are balancing the two to advance their self-interest, victimizing Afghans and victimizing Afghanistan under international law. That's why the issue of Afghans is very small. Once these players get their acts together, not so much the extra regional players, because they were there and they failed. We also wanted them to fail. I was in Moscow and I told Foreign Minister Lavrov that NATO is now leaving, and also in the presence of deputy foreign ministers of 11 countries, including Pakistan. Now, what's our agenda in the region? What are you going to do in Afghanistan? What is China doing? What's Russia doing? What's Pakistan, Iran, and India? These are the key players. And if you didn't want either directly or indirectly opposing NATO's presence in Afghanistan, now NATO is leaving. What are you, the region, in your own backyard doing? Is the alternative the Taliban, or is the alternative for you to support a principled conflict resolution process where the Taliban would be one of the parties, among others, even then? This was in 2017, right after which the Kabul process was launched, and which President Ghani, to his credit, did his best to bring the region together, telling them in these more or less similar ways that NATO is now leaving. Here we have a choice between us plus the Taliban, those reconcilable, and a space that is shared with sustainable peace, governance, good rule of law, Afghan women participating, building on the gains that we have made with external players
Yeah.
that we were not happy. Now, how can we sustain this in our shared best interest where Afghanistan is a connectivity corridor for all of you, for water, for energy, for trade, for, cultural exchange. This was the message of Afghans. And I think if you look at them, Afghans did project as much agency on this issue as possible. As much as, it was India, Pakistan always rivaling, pulling Afghans to, either direction, but Afghans were telling both sides. And that's why President Ghani and Karzai made multiple visits to Pakistan. President Karzai went so far to tell Pakistan that we are conjoined twins, which means your
Yeah.
suffering would be ours, and vice versa. And he went multiple times to India, telling India the same thing. Aside from your issues with Pakistan, it's in your shared best interest for Afghanistan to be stable, where both of you could trade with us, work with us, and through Afghanistan with 50 million plus people of Central Asia with energy, with so many other benefits. So let's not dwell too much on the Taliban. They're a project. The project was created. The project can be undone so far as the region has an agenda that's substantive, that's long term, that is shared, that's when. That's where my concern is on behalf of 40 million Afghans. We do
Yes.
talk for
I mean,
Afghans, but not those park clients. And we also talk for the peoples of the region. The youthful populations of India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, and even Central Asia want exactly what I'm saying: peaceful coexistence, win-win programs of
I think nowadays, I think,
prosperity
Ambassador,
and
I
peace.
think we're kind
So
of
I
like
speak
drifting
also for
so
the
much.
region, not just for Afghanistan.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I think on an optimistic note, I've been actually meaning to come to Dr. Sharifi for a while now. Uh, I would want to know, Aryan, how, we were speaking about it this evening, how Pakistan can bring a meaningful change in the region and specifically for Afghanistan, if it were to do so. Uh, would you like to respond to what Ambassador Durrani has said, what Ambassador Headley has said, and then tie into like a meaningful change, observations taken from your survey?
Well, I think in terms of practical steps, Ambassador Haidari talked sufficient enough, and I do not want to repeat that. I just want to clarify one thing that I mentioned in the beginning. And in the beginning, I mentioned that it is time for a paradigm shift in the strategic outlook of Pakistan towards Afghanistan and vice versa, the same thing. That I meant a very honest, look into what happened over the past 50, 60 years, and then acknowledging what went wrong, and then moving on with the corrected course of action. If we continue to say, okay, well, Pakistan never sheltered the Taliban and Pakistan never sheltered the Afghan Mujahideen, and it was all the Afghan Mujahideen, and they went and saw in Makkah and came back and they started fighting each other, and Pakistan had no role in that, then we're not being honest. Then that paradigm shift that I was suggesting is not really happening, because the reality is not that. The reality is that Pakistan has been very much directly involved in all of these proxy groups, creating them, helping them, supporting them, deploying them, and eventually many of them bringing to power inside Afghanistan, and then eventually finding out that that was not serving even Pakistan's own self-interest, and the current Taliban government is the living example of that. If we continue to think that way, well, the Taliban in Afghanistan, Kabul will also say, well, the TTP is a Pakistani problem. We have nothing to do with the TTP or the BLA. Go deal with it. Why are you bombing my houses and my hospitals? I mean, if we continue this, then we are basically continuing the paradigm of the past 50, 60 years, and things are not going to change. Yes, maybe Pakistan have the upper hand tactically, but eventually it is not going to serve its purpose. And of course, it's not serving the Afghan purpose. it is critical that we are honest to each other. The current Pakistani defense minister, Khwaja Asif, multiple times in the media acknowledged what Pakistan has been doing at the behest of the UK and the United States in Afghanistan. And he acknowledged himself before the Pakistani parliament that that was a strategic mistake for Pakistan. So let's acknowledge the mistake and move on. The same thing is on Afghans, I'm saying. This entire view of animosity towards Pakistan, this issue of insisting on the Durand line, and some of us actually do, some Afghans, oh, Lara Ubar Pakhtunistan, the large Afghanistan. These are ideas that keep hurting the stability of the two countries. These are the ideas that keep hurting the stability of Afghanistan. And these are the core issues, the core problems. We, both sides, would need to move beyond this historical animosity and the look that we have towards each other. That's what I call a paradigm shift. And I think unless that happens, then no parts of the very practical plan that Ambassador Haidari mentioned can be actually possible. Because even currently, and I'm telling you right now, I have very specific, credible information that Pakistan is actually right now going after, those individuals that Ambassador Haidari mentioned who do not represent Afghan people, former mujahideen, former warlords, former fighters in Turkey, in the UAE, even across the United States and Europe. They're trying to bring them back, not the actual people, not the people who matter. Even there are reports, and credible ones, that certain individuals from the former Afghan military officers who are currently into really bad situation in Iran are being shifted into Pakistan and being prepared for another proxy group. What I'm saying is that this proxy game must end, really, because it has not served anybody else. Pakistan really would, should and can step up as a responsible player, as a regional player, as a big brother, to engage with Afghans who want peace, with Afghans who want rationality, with Afghans who do not want another proxy war inside Afghanistan that would again then hurt Pakistan too. That's what I am basically saying. I hope I'm clear on that.
I think so, because I could see Ambassador Durrani paying attention to the specific points you made. And before, dissecting what Sharifi said, I would like to know, I would want the discussion also to be a little more based in the present, not in the future, and discussing the future, which none of us can practically control. I would like to know that there are ongoing talks between Pakistan and Afghanistan to bring the conflict to an end. Ambassador Durrani, speaking to you on this, is there a timeline that we can look at, and what could be the most meaningful result of these talks? And if you would like to respond to Ambassador Hedri and Dr. Sharifi as well. And please be elaborate, because we love hearing you.
My personal view is that we should leave Afghanistan to its own devices. Pakistan should have no truck whatsoever with any of the Afghan groups. This is my personal view.
Sorry, I think he's dropped from the conversation.
I have lost connection.
Yeah, looks like that. I think we can give it like a few seconds before he joins back. So
maybe Solly cut him off. He didn't like that point.
To his credit, he's been actively working on the peace dialogue between the two sides, actually. Yesterday, he's just come back from Istanbul. So, yeah.
But I think maybe it's a good opportunity to, again, emphasize what Dr. Sharifi said, that we cannot just, either escape from the problem or continue with the same lies and refusing to acknowledge Pakistan's destructive role in Afghanistan, which has now has been haunting Pakistan in the form of at least BLA and TTP terrorist attacks. But that's also even selective engagement, their peace talks with the Taliban. or via a military action airstrikes, which have only killed ordinary Afghans and have unfortunately destroyed Afghanistan's basic infrastructure built with international aid before 2021, which is tragic. And they fully exploited, unfortunately, this regional instability involving U.S.-Iran war. So unless we're constructive in building, there
Yeah,
wouldn't be,
we're happy to
unfortunately,
have
would
you
be
back,
more of the same.
Ambassador.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think we are ready for
Sorry,
Ambassador.
I lost the contact because I didn't look at my laptop's charge, and it was over. So what I wanted to say, and it's my personal view, I don't represent any government. And the issue is that leave the Afghans to their own devices, and they should come up with their own solutions, whatever they want to do. We have had enough of it, and we have burnt our fingers, at least during the past 47 years, if not earlier. So leave the Afghans to themselves, and they can be better judges, because we can't live in the history for all the time, and we should move on. So this is what I want to emphasize. And since I thought it would be a twin issue, and nothing much has been spoken about Iran-US war. It's only about Afghanistan. I know it is neglected. Ever since the Taliban came, it is neglected. And secondly, don't forget, please ask this question to the United States, which signed the agreement with the Taliban. And they shook hands and they were smiling. And there was a sitting government led by Mr. Ashraf Ghani. And Mr. Karzai is still living there in Kabul, right? So it means it was some kind of modus vivendi, some kind of an understanding between all those who are there. And Mr. I think it was Sharifi Saib, Dr. Sharifi, that you spoke about the new faces. At least I don't know those new faces. I'm meeting you today. For instance, it's my misfortune or neglect. But the issue is that where are they? And they're all outside Afghanistan. If you are outside Afghanistan, it's like Iranian situation where the crown prince is outside. And he's not providing an alternate to the Iranian people. Even if they want to go for regime change, Americans have tried that and they have failed. Because once you are in the capital, unless you render your sacrifice, and Afghans have been rendering these sacrifices for the past 47 years, but they have fled. They have left the country. Yes, it is their right to safety, to save their lives and all that. No one is questioning that. But we are talking about a political process, and that has to be there, and that has to be done through political struggle. The so-called 20-year democratic period, while you had presidential form of government, Mr. Karzai was not a popular leader. He was paratrooped by the Americans. What happened in Bonn? Sattar Sirat was neglected while he got more votes as compared to Karzai, but Americans wanted it. What happened to Mr. Ashraf Ghani? He was not a popular leader. Again, he was paratrooped and given to the Afghans as fait accompli. And you had to vote for him. So this is something, I think there are basic corrections which are to be made in the political struggle in Afghanistan. And they have to actually agree to evolve a modus vivendi whereby they can live together. There has to be a bare minimum manifesto under which all there are over 80 political parties when I was posted in Afghanistan from 2005 to 9. And elections were held on non-party basis, whether it was Vulasi Jirga or whether it was presidential elections. So what kind of political system we had? The Afghan constitution was a cut and paste of the United States. So what happened? Where was the Afghan content into constitution making, into that political process? Where were they, these so-called 300,000 armed forces which were established in Afghanistan? They melted down before the deadline. What happened? No one is asking those questions. Where are those leaders and those warlords? They pocketed those money in the name of army soldiers. I'm not saying this. Cigar reports are full of it. So this is something we have to sit with. So therefore, my advice to Pakistan, whosoever rules, whether it is military, civil, or it is hybrid system, that please leave the Afghans to their own devices. You should be strict along the border. That's it. It may sound unusual, but I think for the time being, already Afghans have suffered a lot, and Pakistan is getting the blame. So either you accept the blame or you take measures whereby you leave the Afghans to their own devices. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. In that case, there's a risk of regional spillover, whatever role Pakistan takes in this case, especially with the mediation aspect that we're talking about with the US and Iran. And these regional spillovers include energy shocks, the instability in Balochistan, and their own like domestic pressure. So would any one of you also want to address that there's a risk attached to being such a good moderator, but also mediator, but also, the opportunities that are ahead for Pakistan now? Tanya, would you like to take this up, please?
Well, I suppose the only thing I can say right now is it's also important to distinguish between the regime and the people, and punishing what we've noticed in the last several years is punishing a regime often means punishing the people. And the people of Afghanistan are not only dealing with pretty oppressive policies, but they're also dealing with humanitarian hardships resulting from climate change, from earthquakes, food shortage, all of these types of hardships, And so I think what we need to consider is that we keep waiting around for the international community to come in and save the day, to rescue. It's not going to happen. We've seen the international community fail on so many counts, not just Afghanistan, but we've seen what's happening in Palestine. Who has stood up for the Armenians who were kicked out of their hometowns in Azerbaijan? Churches are being demolished. Where's the international community? So to wait around for the international community to now step up is a little bit wishful thinking. So coming back to what we said earlier, that perhaps those who have to be involved in the solution are those with skin in the game, people who are going to be impacted by whatever policies, whatever decisions are made. So personally, that's what I would like to see, is for those impacted directly to have a say in how these conflicts are resolved.
Yeah. I believe one of my questions just went a little unanswered in the whole discussion. Ambassador Durrani, I was wondering if the open war could be announced as ended anytime soon. Are we looking towards the end of hostilities between the two sides? Are the talks inching anywhere close to that?
Between whom?
Pakistan and Afghanistan. The open war that has been declared, that was declared.
No, I don't think. I think it would be only intelligence-based operations, and prime target is TTP, and that too, where we have been informing in advance when the Afghan Taliban government did not take the action. So I think this is what I know. But in future, it's there's a lot of uncertainty now because the credibility or say trust level has gone as far as Pakistan is concerned.
Right. Yeah. I think that brings us to the the long and short, the length and breadth of our discussion. I want to check with Saleh if we have any more extra questions. There is something in the chat. I think I can just quickly go through that. I don't see it actually, Saleh. Would you be able to probably let me know if there are questions? Q&A, okay. Okay, Dr. Hassan, researcher. He's a researcher at the University of Oxford in the UK. He says that the policies of major powers signify a departure from multilateral principles, or do they represent a reconfiguration of multilateralism itself? Do he wants your opinion? Any one of you who wants to take the question to answer if the international institutions such as the UN appear ineffective, which is one more question that I also wanted to ask. UN has largely appeared ineffective in the multiple ceasefire peace talks that are going on. Does multilateralism risk becoming merely a normative ideal rather than a practical framework, as well as the policies of major powers signify a departure from multilateral principles? Or do they represent a reconfiguration of multilateralism itself? It's a little complicated, but if anyone wants to take it.
If I can give a short answer, multilateralism is very much there. Of course, the UN system is very much there. Unless it is replaced by another system, it is going to stay. Yes, how effective it has become or how ineffective it has become, it all depends on the member states. How Security Council behaves, especially in the presence of 5 veto-wielding powers, that would matter. For instance, when it comes to Israel's nuclear program, so you can expect that it will be vetoed. When Israel's genocide is tabled, it is vetoed. When you talk about this war, say last year war and this year war, launched by Israel, followed by United States. So you can't condemn these actions in the UN Security Council, which is the custodian of peace and security at the global level. So, but even then, it is the legitimacy which the UN system gives. I give you 2 examples. One was post 9/11. It was the UN Security Council resolutions 1368 and 1373, which allowed use of force in Afghanistan. But it was the same Security Council in 2003 when US wanted to go to Iraq. It could not get the legitimacy from the UN, and France, being a veto-wielding power, opposed it. I was in the UN at that point. I was in our mission at the UN, and we were members of the UN Security Council then. So, so for the United States, Afghanistan war was a war of necessity, while Iraq war was war of choice. So here, the issue of necessity and choice comes, and that's how the nations behaved. So therefore, in Iraq, United States was rated as occupying power. But in Afghanistan, it was not called as an occupying power because it enjoyed the legitimacy of the United Nations system. So therefore, when we have chalked out and we have agreed to this criteria, so then you see wherever there are conflicts and in which the UN Charter principles are being agreed to, or where those are flouted. So you can, even if may not be able to enforce it, because enforceability under Chapter 7 is another big issue, which is now being debated. So, therefore, UN is still the legitimate forum, organ, which can actually resolve the disputes. But as you know, it's being flouted. ICJ, its purpose is that parties should come bring their disputes. But you have seen what has happened. India-Pakistan case is very much clear. On the UN Kashmir issue, UN's Security Council resolutions are very much there. But it's being flouted. So, I mean, there can't be one single example. There are many examples where the UN system charter principles have been flouted. So the question, when you talk about the reconfiguration and others, these are the things. You had the League of Nations, but the United Nations Charter borrowed almost bulk of those previous provisions from there. But at the same time, you had the Second World War, in which the atomic bomb was used. And you can say the lethality, in fact, brought in to the nations to come to this understanding. I hope, I pray that situation does not arise where these nations adopt to extreme measures. For instance, there was a danger that Israel may use the atomic bomb. So I think if that's the case, and in that world we are living, then I think it's an unfair world, and it's better that we should form a coalition to talk about and give premium to peace rather than being dictated terms. Yes.
I'll just say a few words in the Afghan context, and we have seen over the past 4 decades that
I
unfortunately.
just want to flag that we are short on time, so we'll have to keep it really brief, and I will be taking final points.
Sure.
So this would be like 30 seconds each.
Yeah, so basically, it is unfortunately the erosion of what I would say, to put it in international relations theories, of neoliberal institutionalism. Taken over by defensive realism, mostly, realism, so to speak. As a result, then the states, creating non-alignment, a mini-alignment, a multi-alignment, as we know, basically serving their self-interest, trampling on principles and laws which they adopted under the UN Charter. The UN Charter not being a supranational, it's government with enforcement capacity. And so ultimately, it depends on the member states, especially the powerful ones, to the extent that they restrain themselves, to the extent that they exercise, equitable and equal sovereignty under the charter. If they refuse to do so, in situations that we have witnessed over the past recent years, this is the situation that we get. Basically, everyone hedging and self-interest, and as a result, victimizing states like Afghanistan with negative sovereignty, but lacking positive sovereignty, lacking, defense in terms of elements of power to defend its sovereignty or neutrality. That's where things stand as we speak.
Okay. All right. Dr. Sharifi, your final points for this, yes.
Do you want me to talk on this topic or anything else that I want to talk about?
The floor is yours, but would you want to submit your concluding points?
Okay, well, I would like to recap what I mentioned throughout this webinar today, and that is my hope that, well, when it comes to relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan, I've always been of the opinion, even when I was in the former Afghan government, that the relations would need to be brotherly, would need to be peaceful. I hope that the time has come, that shift would come, that strategic thinking in Islamabad and in Kabul would shift, that if Pakistan is taking an active role in facilitating some kind of a change in Afghanistan, that I hope that they would push for a peaceful change, that this idea of creating yet another proxy group to start another war against the Taliban, that will not pay off either for Afghanistan or for Pakistan or for the region. And I hope that Pakistan will not do that. And if, as Ambassador Durrani mentioned, if Pakistan wants to completely let Afghanistan be on its own, that would also be a good course of action. At least if Pakistan did not negatively impact the situation, then I think Afghans could also do something on their own. And so that is my hope, either a positive view, a positive impact, or at least not a negative impact is my hope from
Would your
Pakistan.
survey have revealed an idea of what a change that comes from within Afghanistan would look like?
That is something too difficult to fathom at present right now. But if you look at the past 50 years, it's mostly been outside meddling, be that Pakistan or the Soviet Union or the United States of America or somebody else, that actually brought us all this misery. If we were left alone 50 years ago, we would probably not have been in this situation. And so even if we are left alone right now, one way or another, we could find a way to resolve our issues, and we could find a way to move on.
Ambassador Durrani, would you like to submit your points, please? And
No,
respond to Dr. Shahid.
I think I have spoken enough, and it was quite useful to know different views. And challenges are there, but at the same time, solutions are also in the hands of the nations, the people, and they can decide the best. And I should repeat Czech leader Havel's famous saying that the rulers should fear the power of the powerless. So I think this is my message, that all leaders, wherever they are, whether they are warlords or they claim to be leaders, they have to now endure the pain. They should know what the pain is, and then only then they will come to know about the pain of the common man, a hungry child, an illiterate woman, and a disabled man or woman. So I think, and then if they don't do that, then fear that day that when these powerless would get up. And what you have seen recently in Nepal, what you have seen recently in Bangladesh, and what you've seen in Sri Lanka. So the same can happen. It has happened earlier in Afghanistan. It can happen again also. It can happen in Pakistan also. It can happen anywhere. It can happen in India. It can happen in any part of the world. Yes.
All right. On that very humane note, and because it's really late for people here in Asia, Ambassador Durrani and I would like to end the webinar here. And because the situation is really evolving at this point, it is constantly changing. Tomorrow we will wake up to probably how the US chooses to engage with Iran. How does it want to take up the mediation efforts from any other ally? Because we all understand that US is also looking to end the war, looking for an off-ramp, and so is Iran. But the points on which both sides disagree are also continuing. So I guess the conversation and the theme of this discussion will remain the same. What remains to be seen is how people in Afghanistan are going to take ownership of the situation, if it comes to that, when it comes to that. So I guess that's all. If there is anything anyone else wants to add, we still have 1 more minute, but I think we've heard enough, we've spoken enough for 120 minutes. So that's all. Is there something else that I could offer to anyone here, or shall we wrap it up?